So today is May 4th, 2020. We're doing the quarantine parent. We're talking today about, it's the quick guide to effective homeschooling. So we're going to give you some essentials on homeschooling. What do you think they're going to take away from this, Hannah?
That was a good question. I hope a better understanding of intrinsic motivation, because I don't think a lot of people know the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic.
Really? I think it's just such a part of me. Sometimes I forget.
I know.
So we'll clarify that. And I think they need to know that, and they need to know how to be able to promote that in their kids so that it's a lot less frustrating for them and their kids when it comes to doing schoolwork. So yeah. We'll talk about that. I think they're gonna, I definitely think they're gonna be a lot clearer about that. So I'll cover what we're gonna be talking about today. But what we've been doing the last couple of weeks to help support parents, because it's hard. Being a parent is hard, especially right now, especially with everything that's going on and you taking on new roles. We have the Potentia parent group where every week for parents who are asking this question, like the schools are closed, now what do we do? It's for you. It's for you if your kid is anywhere from kindergarten to high school seniors. If you are now their homeschool teacher or teacher's aide, because they still have their teachers, but you're helping out. If you're really challenged with adapting to the new environment and you're balancing other demands, like you've got a full-time job and your kids are driving you crazy. Or you're feeling guilty for neglecting their needs because you are so busy. So if this is you, you're in the right place, and we're here to give you some really important, impactful tips that are going to help you to stay sane and to help your kids thrive in this environment. Does that sound good, Hannah?
Yeah.
Okay. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. We'll go over those at the end of the session. So think of this as a workshop. We're going to be trying out new things, and it's things that you can participate in. And it's for you who are parent teachers, because you are now both a parent and a teacher. And we're here to give you some tools to help you out to be both a parent and a teacher. Here's the one takeaway. I'm Conrad, by the way, and I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. The one takeaway I would like to give you for today is this: to make your kids happy, make their schoolwork sad. I will go over what that means a little bit later, but that's the main takeaway for today. And I'll go over SAD as an acronym, and it relates to motivation. There's 3 elements to motivation that are really important to know, and specifically intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic. So extrinsic is you're motivated by an external factor like bribes or the threat of punishments. What if instead of that, your kids were internally motivated, like they wanted to do their schoolwork on their own? It sounds miraculous, but it can happen. And that's what we mean by intrinsic motivation. But for that to happen, you have to have these 3 elements. I made this acronym SAD for a reason, because I was talking to my wife about these 3 elements, and my wife is here, by the way. Hello, wife. And I asked her, do you remember the 3 elements of intrinsic motivation? And she couldn't remember. This is for you, babe, because now you have a nice acronym to memorize it. The 3 elements of intrinsic motivation to learn. The first in that series is making the learning socially and emotionally connected. We'll give you some tips on how to do that. 2, making it autonomous. In other words, giving because autonomy actually means, it's Latin for self-rule. Giving them some elements of self-rule, giving them some choices in what they do on a daily basis is gonna make them more intrinsically motivated, as opposed to you just constantly telling them what to do. And it needs to be differentiated. It needs to be made specific to their learning needs. Every child is different, and every child needs something different to help them to thrive. How do I know this? Well, okay, so here's my expertise. This is where I don't know a lot, but I do know a lot about this, and that is about teaching. So I own my own test prep and admissions consulting business, Potential Prep. And before that, I earned 2 master's degrees. The first was in a master's in education from Harvard, and I also earned a master's in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. I also was the #1 rated SAT teacher out of 6,000 teachers nationwide. I used these same principles that I'm going to be teaching you today. And these are the things that got me to get my students to do the homework that is often boring and painful, that got them the results that just really incredible score increases. And this is all, so it's not just theoretical knowledge. This is practical knowledge that I've honed over. I've had over 4,300 students, believe it or not. It's like kind of amazing when you think about it, over the course of my career. But not only that, I'm not just a teacher, but I'm also a dad. So this is the father of positive psychology, Martin Seligman, who I had the pleasure of learning from when I was at the University of Pennsylvania. I also, when I graduated from Harvard, I got to take my kids across the stage. It was one of the proudest moments of my life, which was incredible. And then later on, again, I studied my company here, Potential. Really, the thing that was like the secret sauce of this, all that I think I really was able to understand all this was, well, look, this is the secret to my success right there, is my lovely wife, Joan. Hello. And I've got my 5 kids. So that's Emmanuel, this is Xavier, that's Elijah, that is Nathaniel, and that is Amelia. So no matter what age group we're talking about, I pretty much have it covered. So whether your son or daughter is kindergarten to high school, I've got these guys that they're my little guinea pigs. So they're like my little lab experiments that my wife hates when I say that, but they're my little lab experiments to show what's actually effective in terms of parenting and teaching. And so I've used these strategies not just with my students, but with my kids as well. Of course, they are my joy, and they are, I'm sure your kids are your joy too. And we want the best for them. We want them to be happy. And part of what I studied when I was in UPenn was what makes people happy. And there is this theory called PERMA. These are all when we talk about like what it means to be happy, we could summarize it in these 5 letters, PERMA. So let me talk a little bit about this first before I get into making lessons sad, right? So let me talk about what makes ourselves and our kids happy. Well, you could really categorize it, split it up. Anytime we talk about being happy, we really mean any of these 5 elements. That means positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. So positive emotions meaning being joyful, being really laughing and joyous and happy. And so those are what we mean by like the emotions. But there's also the engagement. Like, are you really focused? And when you're doing something, are you engrossed in it, or is your mind distracted? Relationships. How connected do you feel with your kids and your spouse? Meaning, do you have a mission in life? Do you have a purpose in life? And achievement. This is what we mean by the good grades and going to like the fancy college. Right now, when we're talking about success in school, what should we be focused on? Should we be focused on the achievement? I'm going to argue that really what you should be focused on first is your relationships with your son or daughter, making sure that that's sound and whole. And then the achievement, making sure that they're keeping up with their schoolwork is gonna come later. So this is kind of a brief overview of PERMA, but we really want to, when we're talking in terms of SAD, of these three elements of intrinsic motivation to learn, and we focus on the first one, which is the S, socially and emotionally connected. This really relates to the relationship aspect of PERMA, making sure that that's solid, making sure that that's whole. If you want effective homeschooling, you have to make sure that the relationship that you have with your son or daughter is strong, and that you put that first. The other stuff, it's really hard to learn if you are not emotionally connected with your kids. So the problem with trying to be socially and emotionally connected with your kids is they when school closed, they lost that element of social connection to their classmates, and therefore a lot of the experience that you had with them, I think that I've heard from a lot of parents, including our own experience with our kids, was there was just a lot of stress. So that stress, the symptomatic of that stress was the complaining, or in terms of if they have siblings, the fighting, or being really overly engrossed in screens, like they were watching Netflix and video games, really a lot early on, especially when the quarantine period first started. This is pretty much what our kids look like early on. And a lot of that, and what we were doing early on too was like, I think a lot of you could relate to this, especially trying to keep them really from falling behind in school. We were constantly nagging them, and I hear this from a lot of parents. Really, there was a lot of conflict there in terms of getting their assignments done. Now, how do we stop that? Well, first of all, we need to understand what's going on underneath all of that complaining. Now, you could notice here, think of this as an iceberg, and what you're seeing in this iceberg, you may be seeing the complaining, sneaking around, the refusing, fighting, maybe even leaving. Or you're seeing the excessive screen time. They might be swearing at you. They might be defiant, disrespecting you, ignoring you. But underneath that is what they're feeling. And that's really the manifestation of everything underneath. It's a feeling of boredom, helplessness, lack of skills, disconnection, being emotionally dysregulated, fear, worry, confusion, powerlessness, misunderstanding, and worry about social status. So before you even get into trying to teach them anything, you have to make sure that emotionally they are feeling okay. And this was probably one of the mistakes I made with my older son, Xavier. I eased off of him early on because he was exhibiting that stress. And when we really started letting him cope with the stress of being stuck with his siblings at home and really giving him empathy and understanding there, it was much easier for me to be a teacher to him. So if you're seeing all that, look what's underneath that, because you can't effectively teach your kids unless emotionally you're dealing with the issues underlying. Now, what is the second element of SAD? It's autonomy. It's giving them choices on a daily basis. So not just telling them what to do, like do your homework, do this, make sure you get that done. Does that sound familiar? So if you keep on doing that, at a certain point, they're going to tune you out. And there's certain ways that you could give choices to your kids and still make sure that they're getting all of their responsibilities completed. I'll give you one example of that. we use a Kanban board. Now, in a Kanban board, you put all of the things that they need to get done in one area. In this case, this Kanban board is called the backlog. In the morning, they could pick what it is that so they'll pick a couple of items that they will do that day. And then they're gonna work on one thing at a time. That's that doing column. When they get it done, they'll put it in this column right here. Let me give you a couple of examples of Kanban boards. So this actually has times on this one. You could go to our Facebook page. It's www.facebook.com/potential prep. Hannah, could you put the link in the chat? And it gives you directions on how to create. We have links to different places where you could create the Kanban board. And here's another example. Now this is actually ours. We called our parking lot, or that backlog, the parking lot and train yard. And you notice that we've got different colors for each of us, and my wife and I are included here. The nice part about this is, first of all, they have some element of choice in what they do during the course of the day. So they pick those items, they put it in that to-do list. And a lot of the times that they look lazy, they're actually just overwhelmed. Like they don't know how to get started in the first place. So having this to-do column allows them to focus on a couple of elements. And then that column of doing, they only do one thing at a time. So they're focused on one thing at a time. They also have that satisfaction of moving it to the done board. Now, this actually worked for all of our kids, all ages. Our 6-year-old, she really, we had to give her a little bit more help with it, and we put pictures on there to help her to understand what each of the Post-it notes were. Our 10-year-old picked it up very quickly. He loved it, and he's been the best at it. He especially loves taking the doing and getting it into the done category. It really gives him a sense of accomplishment. And our 13-year-old, probably the one who was resisted the most was our 15-year-old. But he usually gets stuck. He doesn't really need it. Because he's so autonomous on his own and self-regulated on his own. And let me see, is there any questions about this specifically that you see, Hannah, that we might be able to answer? Otherwise, I'll move on. But no, I think the main thing here,
questions right now.
Not right now. Okay. Yeah, the main thing here is to understand that in terms of just giving them some element of choice will allow them to have some feeling of ownership over the task involved, and therefore they're more likely to feel more self-motivated when it comes to doing their schoolwork. Again, you could go to the potential parent group and we'll give you some examples of that. We actually had a previous session where we talked about just specifically just autonomy, giving them some control over what they do. So the last element is the most involved, differentiation. We want to make their schoolwork differentiated. In other words, we want to tailor it to their own specific learning needs. There's a couple ways you could do that. We're going to talk about giving your kids a strengths-based sandwich, a strengths sandwich. And I'll explain what I mean by that. First of all, I need to help you to let's define what a strength is. Because what we want to do is we want to recognize and cultivate the strengths that your kids have. Well, what is a strength? Here's the definition that we're going to be working with. It's got 3 elements. First, performance. You're good at something. 2, energy. You feel good about doing it. Now, why do we separate those 2? I think that for some of you, you may have gone to, like, let's say a piano concert, and you can actually see that there are some kids that they're really good at the piano, but they were forced to do it, so they don't really have very much energy in doing it. And there's the opposite, where there's the enthusiasm, energy, and they're not very good, but they feel, you could tell that kid is really feeling good doing that piano concert. So there's really a difference. When we're talking about a strength, it has both, that they're they both are good at it and they feel good doing it. Then the third thing is that it's high use, that you don't have to force them to do, they want to do it on their own. And if really given a choice, they would fill their lives doing that one activity. So that is a strength. And there's a couple ways that you could determine that. And one of the ways that with positive psychology you could do the VIA strengths test, which I actually did that with my kids and my wife and me. And what the VIA strengths quiz does, and that's also on we'll put a link there in we have the Potentia parent group. So if you go to the Facebook page, you join the parent group, we have a link to the quiz that you could do with your son or daughter. And it'll categorize their top 5 strengths. So these are 24 strengths that they studied and put a lot of research into. So there's creativity, curiosity, judgment, perspective, bravery, perseverance, zest, honesty, social intelligence, kindness, love, leadership, fairness, teamwork, forgiveness, love of learning, gratitude, spirituality, self-regulation, humility, appreciation of beauty, prudence, hope, and humor. So if you think of something like piano playing, for example, that's a skill. But what are the character strengths that lead to that skill? Well, someone like a really world famous artist like Mozart or the Beatles, they need an element of creativity in them to be able to be good at the piano and music, right? They might have, if you're an artist, you might have the character strengths of appreciation of beauty. For someone who is really good at sports, they might be excellent at self-regulation. They might have really good leadership skills. So it brings those other skills. It's like the basis. So these 24 character strengths are the basis of the other skills that may be more substantive. And what we found was, like, let me just go through a couple of examples. For Xavier, we found, this is our 15-year-old, that his top strengths is fairness, equity, injustice, leadership, gratitude, judgment, critical thinking, open-mindedness, hope, optimism, and future-mindedness. These are his top 5 strengths. Nathaniel, it totally makes sense, curiosity and interest in the world. It was bravery and courage. He does martial arts, and you could really see that exhibited when he does tournaments. Love of learning, he has fairness and justice, and he has humor and playfulness. Incidentally, part of how we got them to do chores was we used that element of fairness and justice to split up the chores more equitably, and they had more ownership over the chores, and therefore they were more likely to do them. For our daughter Amelia, it was appreciation of beauty and excellence, it was love of learning, it was industry and perseverance, social intelligence, caution, carefulness, and discretion. So we help to uncover these strengths, and we help to recognize them, and we help them to utilize these strengths on a daily basis. Elijah, who's our 13-year-old, his top strength was appreciation of beauty and excellence. The other strengths, our kids were actually surprised, right? And we incorporated these strengths in, I think, what was really a humongous turning point for Elijah. I think the top 2 strengths really made sense: creativity, originality, and ingenuity. He has his own YouTube channel, by the way, and he has over, like, Hannah, do you know did we tell you how many subscribers
I think he told me like over 500.
Yeah, actually he has closer to 600 subscribers already to his YouTube channel, which is great. It's amazing, right? And he obviously can see things that we don't see. He was always really into drawing pictures. It was something that we had to encourage him to do. But he also has these other strengths: kindness and generosity, capacity to love and be loved, and spirituality and faith. Now, this is, for any of you who have a 13-year-old, you may know that it is very, very challenging to have a 13-year-old. So these strengths aren't necessarily at the forefront of what we see on a daily basis, if you know what I mean. Well, knowing these were the strengths, instead of nagging him to do his chores, so first of all, what we did was we split up the chores equitably, and we gave him the duty of doing laundry. Now, he's really into Thomas. As you can see, he's really into trains. He's on the autistic spectrum, by the way. And this strengths-based approach to getting them to do what they want to do, or getting them to do things without nagging or complaining, is I think especially effective for kids on the autism spectrum, because they're so used to being told how they're inadequate and how what they're doing doesn't live up to expectations, that when they're given feedback on their strengths and what's good about them, they eat it up, they love it, right? So when we were talking about doing the laundry, one of the things we talked about was how he loves, because of his appreciation of beauty, he loves when things are really nice and orderly and neat. And how we talked to him, instead of just saying, go do the laundry, that made it more effective and made him more autonomous at doing it. We talked in terms of, hey, if this is really a great way for you to show the family love. And this is really a great way for you to, because when you've got as many kids as we have, the laundry is a huge monster that grows very, very quickly and it looks very ugly. So he was able to make our house more beautiful by doing the laundry. So when you recognize, cultivate their strengths, you'll find that they're more receptive to what it is that you're asking them to do, rather than just nagging them. Now, let me give you another.
So how you talk to Elijah, using his strength, that was the sandwich, right?
That was our strengths-based sandwich, where instead of just saying, hey, for example, for doing the dishes with Nathaniel, instead of just saying, go do the dishes, I put it in terms of love of learning. Now, one of the things that I mentioned to Nathaniel was that Xavier is really self-regulated. Like, he knows he has the discipline to be able to do things on his own, and you could give him multiple directions and he'll get it done, as opposed to some of our kids, you give them a direction and then they get distracted and they do something else. And Nathaniel, when he heard that, he said, hey, I want to learn how to be able to do multiple tasks in a row. So I gave him a challenge. I gave him 3 tasks to do in a row. And he did those 3 things. Then I gave him 4 tasks to do in a row. And he took it as an opportunity to learn self-regulation, which was more in line with his strengths, as opposed to me just pulling the dad card on him and saying, just get it done, right? Is that, and when the language that we used was, hey, I know you really love learning, and I know you want to learn how to do self-regulation. Why don't you go do the dishes, go vacuum and clean up the kitchen. Clean up the living room. And if you do that, we'll see if you could learn how to do 4 tasks after. So complete those 3 tasks, and we'll see if you could do 4 tasks instead. That is so much better than and Nathaniel is one of those kids where, if you don't engage him in an activity, the complaining, it is mastery level complaining. It's just, he's really, really good at that. So, giving him that strengths-based sandwich makes the chores far more yummy. That clarify that, Hannah, and thank you for asking that.
Yes.
And let me give you another strategy here for taking the complaining and turning it into something manageable. As a matter of fact, what you want to do is you want to turn that feeling that they often feel, which is being overwhelmed by what they have to do on a daily basis. It may look easy to you, but it's actually very complicated for them. how do you turn that overwhelm into motivation? How do you get them to want to do their work and not let it feel like it is just another thing that's adding to their stress? Well, let's talk about mindset, because mindset is everything. And specifically, let's talk about the fixed versus the growth mindset. And you might have heard about these two mindsets at some point, but let me define them for you. So with let's start with the fixed mindset. You can see right here, they believe that they're either good at something or they're not good at something. And if you believe that, then of course, when they're frustrated, they're going to give up. So think about that. When they're trying that new math concept and they don't get it right away, what are they going to say about themselves? They're going to say, well, I'm not good at math. Well, if they're not good at math, why should they do their homework? Logically, it wouldn't make sense if they hold this belief, because they're not going to get good at it anyways. So because of that, they do not like to be challenged. They don't like to be challenged because when they fail, they're no good. Now think about that, because part of the learning process is failing. Our youngest son right now, Emmanuel, he is 1 year old. He now he knows how to walk. He really just started learning how to walk during the stay-at-home period. Well, what did he do before? He fell over. And part of falling over, that is part of the learning process of learning how to walk. And learning math, a lot of that has to do with being wrong. Reading, it's the same thing. Learning entails failure. So they have to love failure for them to learn effectively. Now, kids with a fixed mindset, they want to be told they're smart. And they have a very interesting, success is a zero-sum game for them. If they see other people succeed, they feel threatened because they feel that their abilities determine everything. It's not something that can be learned. They're not going to be inspired by others. They're going to be jealous of others. Now, someone with a growth mindset, they believe they can learn anything that they want to. And because they feel that way, look how they respond to frustration. When they feel frustrated, they persevere. They like to challenge themselves. Why? Because when they fail, they learn. When I fail, I learn. So if you want to effectively homeschool your kids, you have to promote this growth mindset, and you have to help them to embrace failure. And I know that that's hard, and I know that it's hard for you if you especially if you don't have any teaching experience, to be able to help your kids to adopt this. But for you to be able to help your kids to adopt this, you have to adopt it yourself, and you have to have a growth mindset about being a teacher. And you're going to fail a lot, and that's okay. That's part of the process of being a parent. It's part of the process of being a teacher. It's part of the process of being human and being alive. So embrace the failure. Instead of telling your kids how smart they are, focus on recognizing when they're trying, even when they're failing. Focus on their effort. If you do that, this is what's going to happen. They're going to be inspired by other people's success. They're going to have more of this belief that their effort and their attitude determine everything, as opposed to their abilities. So they're going to try harder. They're going to put the work in. And what happens when they put the work in? Or they're going to be better at school, and they're going to be better at life in general. So that's the growth versus the fixed mindset. And one of the powerful words here that you could teach them is yet. So if they say, oh, I'm not good at math. Yeah, you're not good at math yet. Oh, I'm not good at reading. Well, you're not good at reading yet. Oh, you're not a good teacher. That's okay. You're not a good teacher yet. If you learn these principles and you learn to instill a growth mindset in your kids, you will be a good teacher, and you're going to be a good teacher because your students are going to be great learners. There's another concept. I'm going to end on two more concepts here. So you have to have that growth mindset, and you also have to understand that frustration really also relates to this principle of flow. So look at this XY axis here. Tell me if I'm getting too academic here, Hannah.
No,
but on the bottom portion, we have, this is their skill level. Okay. So let me give you an example. So if you have, and this goes from low to high, their skill level. Let's say they have low skills in math, but the challenge level for them is high. They're doing work beyond what they're now capable of. Well, that is what causes frustration. They're going to be in this zone right here, the frustration zone, where their skills are low. So they're right here. Their skills are low, but the challenge level is high. They're going to be in that frustration zone. Now, if their skills, so I saw this with a couple of our kids in certain areas. They felt frustrated in what they were doing, and we also had this boredom. I think like Nathaniel was a really good example of this, where we worked on stuff last summer where we were able to really get him a couple of grades level ahead of where he was, which is really awesome. It's a tribute to his level of learning. But the problem with that is that now when he's doing the math assignments that he's doing here at home, he's kind of bored of them because they're not really in his skill level. So his skills are high. The skills are in the higher end of the spectrum, but the challenge level is low. So now he's in this area, the board area. Part of how we got Nathaniel in this flow area the previous summer was we constantly, so I worked with my son and my 15-year-old son helped me with Nathaniel. We put him in adaptive learning software in math that really, it changed according to his level. So he was able to stay in this flow channel where the challenge matched his skills. So if you want to help your kids, if you see them frustrated, help them by making their tasks more manageable. Find ways to make their tasks easier to match their skill level. Part of that is being in tune with the skills that your kids can exhibit. And sometimes that's hard for us parents to be able to determine because a lot of the times what is easy for us is actually very hard for them. So you want them in that flow channel. If they're being bored, you want to challenge them. And that's really what was the defining element, the secret sauce that made Nathaniel really succeed very rapidly last summer. And we're going to get him on track with that too. Now, this is the last concept, one of the most important concepts that relates to teaching, and it relates to what we just talked about, being in that flow chart. Well, the problem with a lot of distance learning is it's down over here. What the student can do independently, this is stuff that they could do on their own, independent of their teachers or your help. If they can't do it, it's going to be over here or over here or over here. Now, let me talk about the zone of proximal development first. Well, the zone of proximal development is where you as parents want the assignments to be for your kids. It should be stuff that they can't necessarily do on their own, but they can do with your guidance. So every time that we put them in that zone, the lower zone grows. So what they can do independently grows. So we need all of the assignments to be here. If it's beyond their skill level, that's a recipe for frustration. Some of their assignments you might want to check. It might even be up here or here, which means that even with assistance, they can't do it. Even with your help, they can't do it. So you might need help changing that. And we're going to start a discussion thread in the potential prep parent group. So join that if you want to, and we'll talk about how to be able to adapt the assignment so they're in that zone, the zone of proximal development where it's optimal learning and they're in that flow chart, because it's really going to be specific depending on if your child is in elementary school or middle school or high school. And you could join that here. That's the potential parent group. And you'll see it under the groups section of our Facebook group. That is, I think that Hannah put the link in. So let me just kind of wrap up what we talked about today. Make your schoolwork sad to make your kids happier. Make their schoolwork sad. That means make it more socially and emotionally connected. Connect with your kids before anything else. Make sure that your relationship with them is good. So connect with your kids, socially, emotionally connected. Make it autonomous. Give them some choices on what don't just tell them what to do. Give them some choices so that they have some ownership over what is they're doing on a daily basis. And use differentiation. Make it strengths-based. Give them strengths-based sandwiches. Make it so to help them discover their strengths. Make sure that you're promoting a growth mindset with them so that they're really responding to frustration and challenges with that spirit of wanting to learn and wanting to overcome that frustration and challenge rather than giving up. And understand too how to put them in that flow channel, that optimal flow channel, the zone of proximal development, where that's that sweet spot of learning where they're going to be learning the most. So these are the principles of effective homeschooling. I hope you were able to learn something today. If you have any questions, we'll be answering them. Hannah's going to be telling me, but if, I'll say goodbye to all of you who are leaving now, and I'll take some questions. Hannah, are there any specific questions that we should be covering there?
Michelle says, thank you, love the sticker board, and she shared it with friends.
Great.